Randall Dean Clark. Clark's story is one of the most interesting and tragic in the game. It's spread across 5 caves in Zion Canyon, each one with a terminal inside and a journal entry dated a different year. You can find them by moving through the map, and slowly a portrait assembles itself entry after entry. The first one is from 2077. You see, Clark was a former army serviceman with a habit of running off to the wilderness for days at a time, and his wife hated it. But on this day, Clark was an hour from home, taking the scenic route back along State Route 77 when suddenly the bombs dropped. Salt Lake City was gone in an instant, along with his wife and son who were still in the city. The only reason he was still alive was because he'd been out camping. Now Clark wanted to walk straight into the radiation zone to find out if there was a slim chance his wife and son were still alive, but for some reason he didn't, and he walked to Zion Canyon instead, a decision that seemed to follow him for the rest of his life. In his escape, he made it to Fallen Rock Cave and stayed for months, at one point mopping condensation off the walls just to have water, because the radiation outside lasted far longer than his army training said it would. By 2083, he had established camps across the canyon, and we get a glimpse of how he started to thrive. Eventually, Zion started drawing survivors, and a group of Spanish-speaking survivors passed through. Clark watched over them from the shadows without ever revealing himself, stepping in quietly when they needed help and disappearing before anyone could see who'd done it. They thought it was divine intervention when medicine appeared for one of their injured. Then in early 2096, Vault 22 dwellers arrived, over 100 of them, driven out of their vault by a fungal parasite. They hit the Mexican survivor camp on February 11th, killed all the men, and penned the women and children. Clark surveyed the area for 2 days planning a rescue, then went in and found out they'd already eaten everyone they'd taken. Something broke inside him after that. So much so that he spent the next 10 months waging a methodical guerrilla war against them. Ambushes, booby traps, deadfalls, killing 24 of them before the survivors finally fled the canyon. And maybe it was good karma, but after that came 3 good years with a woman named Sylvie, a Vault 22 defector who stumbled into one of his bear traps. The two eventually got together and were expecting a child. The pregnancy prompted Clark to travel to Tokerville and gather every medical book and piece of equipment he could find. 9 months of studying, preparing, determined not to fail a family the second time. Unfortunately, the birth was a breech delivery he couldn't correct, and the cesarean section he performed came too late to save either of them. Oh man, the writers really cooked with this one. Clark buried Sylvie and the baby south of the Zion Narrows, and for the second time, he lost his family. He went back to his cave and made a decision to basically depart from this life, but ultimately didn't go through with it. He lived for a couple more years because his last terminal entry was from 2123. 24 children had appeared in the canyon, escapees from somewhere they called the school, fleeing someone they called the principal. Clark never showed himself to them either. He left gifts, storybooks, weapon manuals, medical books, and notes telling them that Zion was their reward, that they should be kind, but strike back hard when struck. He became a myth they called the Father. At the far end of the canyon, you find his skeleton at the Red Gate. He walked there in January 2124, knowing the cold would finish him before the cancer did, which he found out too late, and recorded his final thoughts under the stars. He wrote that what kept driving him forward through everything was his memories of his family, that with them gone, their only life left was inside him, and that was reason enough to keep going. The children he watched over became the Sorrows tribe, and worshipped him as a deity for generations, never knowing he was just a man who fought his demons alone and won. The Fens Street Phantom. Somewhere underneath Boston, a serial killer left a trail for a detective he'd never met in person. The Fens Street sewer isn't something you stumble into by accident. You find a manhole north of Diamond City, drop in, and immediately understand that someone has been treating this place like a home. Skeletons are posed and displayed throughout the tunnels, each one accompanied by chalk X marks on the wall indicating the body count. At least 24 people ended up down here. What makes it unsettling isn't the bodies. That's honestly commonplace in the post-war world. It's the tapes. The Phantom left a series of holotapes addressed to Dear Detective, a woman who had apparently gotten close enough to his trail that he decided to make a game of it, guiding her through the sewer room by room, letting her get to know him. In the recordings, he comes across as someone genuinely frustrated with the surface world, the way people smile at each other without meaning it, the exhausting performance of everyday life. Down here, he says, he gets to be himself. The detective followed the tapes all the way through, and well, she didn't make it out. You find her remains at the end, which means at some point the game stops being about a killer leaving clues and starts being about a killer who knew exactly where those clues were leading. Unfortunately, there's really no resolution to this story. Nobody knows what happened to the Phantom in the end. Vera Keyes and Frederick Sinclair. I don't know about you, but New Vegas has some of the strongest writing in the Fallout games, or maybe of all games ever, and this story just proves it. The Sierra Madre Casino was actually built for one person. Frederick Sinclair was a wealthy businessman who fell completely in love with a pre-war Hollywood starlet named Vera Keyes, and so he built an entire resort in the Mojave as a monument to her, designed to keep her safe from the war he could already see coming. And he couldn't have made his love more obvious. Her voice is literally the key to the vault beneath it. The words, "begin again" and "let go," spoken into a specific terminal in her voice, would open the elevator down. What Sinclair didn't know when he started building was that the whole thing had been arranged. Dean Domino, a lounge singer and Vera's former partner, had introduced the two of them deliberately. He'd seen Sinclair's interest and used it, with Vera's reluctant help, to set up what was supposed to be the biggest heist in history. Get inside the Sierra Madre on opening night, use her voice to open the vault, take everything, and leave Sinclair in the dust. What Domino didn't count on was that Vera would eventually confess, though the truth is, Sinclair had already known about the plot for some time before she did. He'd just been bearing it. The confession itself was what finally broke him, and he had the vault redesigned into a trap specifically for Domino. A room you could enter but never leave, so he'd have an eternity to think about what he'd done. Vera wasn't going to be spared either, at least not at first. But then she told him about the blackmail, that Domino had been coercing her with evidence of her chem's use and personal history, that she had been blackmailed. Her genuine remorse was enough to make Sinclair change his mind. He went back into the vault's infrastructure to undo the trap, crawling through the pipes to access the electronics directly. But unfortunately, the toxic leak in the ventilation killed him before he finished. When you play Dead Money, you find both of them exactly where they ended up. Vera's skeleton is in her suite, still wearing her gala dress, with the word "Let Go" written on the wall beside her. She'd been trapped inside the casino when its security systems activated on opening night, couldn't get out, and made the decision the only way she could. Sinclair's remains are in the pipes below the vault, next to a duffel bag, not far from the terminal where he'd tried to undo everything he'd done. The holograms that patrol the Sierra Madre are modeled after Vera, playing her final recorded words on a loop, a distress call to Sinclair that he never got to hear, still broadcasting more than 2 centuries later. Ian and Cheryl Orwell. Orwell Orchards had been failing for years before the bombs dropped, and Ian Orwell knew it. He'd been denied loans from the Charleston Bank multiple times, the crop was failing, and he'd gone into debt building something he hadn't even told his wife about, a shelter underneath the farm. When the bombs fell, he got Cheryl inside and sealed the door. The terminal entries you find inside the shelter tell the rest of the story. Christmas 2077, things were still manageable. Ian surprised Cheryl with a baby crib he'd bought before everything collapsed, and they decided they'd try to start a family. By March 2078, no luck, and the equipment was starting to fail. The pool pump, the fusion generator, one of the projectors. By September of that year, Ian was losing hair and couldn't keep weight on, and Cheryl was telling him they needed to find help because the shelter was making him sick. But he refused to leave. The last entry is harder to read. Ian's writing is visibly deteriorating, short sentences foggy, but the intent is clear enough. Cheryl wanted out, and Ian decided she wasn't allowed to leave, so he locked her in the supply room, which he called keeping her safe. What he didn't account for was that Cheryl repaired the exit button on the door, waited until she could hear him in the shower, took the key and walked out. She left a note addressed to anyone who might find it, saying she still loved him. Ian's skeleton is in the shower. That's where he was when she left. The Keller Family. The Keller family didn't have a great relationship before the bombs dropped, and the 5 holotapes they left scattered across the Capitol wasteland make that pretty clear. Alex Keller was a National Guardsman who managed to steal the access code to a secure underground bunker inside the National Guard depot, and then got arrested for it. But before they took him in, he did something either very clever or very manipulative depending on how you read it. He split the 4-digit code and sent one number to each family member, which meant they'd all have to be in the same place to get inside. You find the tapes spread across the wasteland, a pylon shack, a cemetery, a roadside diner, a sniper shack, a camp near the Anchorage Memorial, and pieced together a family that clearly had unresolved things between them. Alex sent each of them 1 digit of the code. Tina got 5, the day of her birth. Ralph's tape is the one that stays with you. He sent his number ahead to his sister, 6, told her she could have it, said he had a mushroom cloud to walk into, wished everyone a happy Holocaust, and that was that. The other 4 made it to the bunker without him. When you finally get inside, there are 3 bodies and a glowing one. The working theory being that the father had been making trips outside into the irradiated wasteland, looking for supplies, accumulated enough exposure to turn, and either killed the others or simply outlived them. Nobody left a note explaining it. Alex, who made the whole thing possible, never made it in at all. Tom McMullin. The pit's supply plant terminal entries aren't easy to find, but when you do, they tell the story of a man who spent months trying to protect people who ended up blaming him for everything anyway. Tom McMullin was the plant supervisor, and when management started bringing in protectrons to replace the human workforce, he stalled them. Told management the robots weren't performing to standards when they clearly were, delayed shipments, bought the workers' time he knew was borrowed. Management eventually made a surprise visit, saw the robots working perfectly, caught 2 employees dismantling one with a sledgehammer, and that was the end of it. They announced the plant would be vacated by 1 p.m. The workers decided McMullin had been helping management all along to save his own job. He grabbed his pistol and ran for the exit. It was already barricaded. He made it to a supply closet and locked the door, figuring he'd wait until they left. They didn't leave. They stood outside and waited for him to come out, and he could hear them through the door. Then the protectrons arrived. McMullin opened the door once, just long enough to see a laser take off one of the workers' arms. Then he went back inside and didn't open it again, sitting there while the screaming in the hallway ran its course and eventually went quiet. The last entry ends with him saying, "Whoever reads this should know he did everything he could to keep these men employed, and that this should serve as an example of how not to replace humans with machines." His skeleton is in the closet. He never came out. The McClellan Family. There's a townhouse in Georgetown with an unlocked front door and a dormant Mr. Handy sitting inside, and nothing in the building tells you what happened to the family who lived there. What you get instead is a terminal with a list of household chores you can assign the robot. Walk Muffy, pick up the grocery order, read the children a bedtime poem. So you pick one and then you watch. If you tell him to walk the dog, the Mr. Handy goes to the backyard and stands over Muffy's remains, trying to coax a corpse that has been there for 2 centuries into standing up. If you tell him to read the children a poem, he walks to the bedroom and recites Sarah Teasdale's There Will Come Soft Rains to 2 small skeletons in a bunk bed, one of them still holding a teddy bear. The poem is about a world that keeps going after mankind is gone. Birds and frogs and soft rain, none of it noticing or caring that we aren't there anymore. It was written in 1920. Ray Bradbury later used it as the title of a short story about a house whose automated systems keep running long after a nuclear war, not knowing the family inside is dead. The Mr. Handy finishes the poem and goes back to his pad. The Miller Family. If you extend the satellites at Relay Tower OSC527, you'll pick up a radio signal coming from somewhere called Big John Salvage. It's a man's voice, clearly panicked, explaining that his family is trapped in their shelter. The generator running the ventilation has died. The hatch was sealed vacuum tight when it lost power and won't open from inside. He explains where the hatch is, in a tipped train car in the junkyard, and asks anyone listening to please start the generator, because they're almost out of oxygen. Then he stops mid-sentence to talk to someone named Kimmy, telling her to stay calm and breathe slowly. Then the message repeats. When you find the shelter and get the hatch open, there's nobody inside waiting to be rescued. The broadcast is pre-recorded, which means at some point John Miller sat down, recorded a distress call, set it to loop, and that was the last thing he could do for his family. Whether anyone came in time is a question the game doesn't answer. The signal is still broadcasting. And that's Fallout's darkest skeleton stories explained. Which one stuck with you the most? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Fallout lore dives.